Welcome to the RAS Project, a conversation about life, entrepreneurship, personal development, family tech, and marketing. My name is Ivan Temelkov, and I'm your host. What's in this podcast for you? Here you will find life-changing advice to help you level up every aspect of your life and business and help you reach your goals and dreams. As always, all content is 100% real, raw, and unfiltered. On today's episode, I have my special guest, Jess, who is the founder and CEO of Longplay, a full-service email marketing agency for e-commerce brands. Jess launched Longplay in 2018, December 2018 to be more precise, and since then it has grown the team to over 18 people and generated over $8.5 million in revenue for her clients. Prior to Longplay, she was the CMO of a seven-figure e-commerce company and wanted to build the type of agency she wished she could have worked with. She lives in Toronto, where she enjoys taking long walks and playing volleyball. Welcome to the show, Jess.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
Awesome. So before we hit record, we were kind of chatting about, some things, and you mentioned entrepreneurship, right? Which I always get excited. So before we kind of get into Longplay brands, let's spend a few minutes. Just tell us, a little bit about yourself. And like, did you just wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm just going to start a company today? How did it all come together?
For sure. And we were just joking, like casually just wake up one day and you're like, hey, it'd be really fun to pour your blood, sweat, and tears into starting a business. And I think the funny thing with entrepreneurship is it's one of those things where everyone dreams of it, but a lot of entrepreneurs I talk to, they're like, if you knew what you were going to get yourself into when you started your business, would you still have done it? And a lot of them are like, might have chickened out, honestly. It takes a piece of you. But yeah, my background was actually in actuarial science and economics. So really had absolutely nothing to do with marketing, especially digital marketing or e-commerce. And I was still in college then. So I was kind of doing that and just not quite sure that this was really the path I wanted to go down. Didn't really want to be in corporate, working in a cubicle, doing spreadsheets for the rest of my life. So really kind of went through probably a year and a half or so of just like a really tough period trying to figure out what my path was, went through like panic attacks, depression, the whole nine, and tried all these different avenues between like UI, UX design, coding, marketing, all these different channels. And eventually I stumbled into a marketing assistant position at a company called Best Self Co. And it was a seven-figure e-commerce brand. And I kind of started as a marketing assistant, really knowing nothing about marketing or e-commerce or digital marketing and really kind of stepping in fresh, but it was a fantastic opportunity for me to learn with a fast growing company where I could get my hands in all aspects, in all channels of marketing, and really see what it takes to scale a company. And then eventually they promoted me as their chief marketing officer. And that's when I learned how to manage a team. So that was probably the first like 2 to 3 years of my marketing experience. And then Longplay started in December 2018. And it started very organically. I was kind of going to entrepreneurship conferences and things like that, and just chatting with other 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs. And they were kind of asking me what we were doing on the email side. So it started with me just kind of giving them, the 3 tips that I think they should implement before they leave, very much just kind of helping out friends. And they reached out a few months later and just like, you know what, can you just like do it for me? I'm like, you know what, wasn't really planning to start an agency. I had all these other plans. But I'm like, sure, let's just say yes to the opportunity and like figure out where it all leads afterwards. So took those clients on, was still working my full-time job. And I was actually still at my full-time job for probably 6 months at the beginning of Longplay. And we were already hiring a few people, and then eventually left May, June of last year. So it's really just been a year of me full-time in the business now. And here we are. It's all grown very organically and through word of mouth.
Yeah. There were several interesting things that you mentioned. So at the beginning, I'm a huge sucker for stories because I have deep appreciation for beginnings. And, you were talking about some things that, like, as you said, a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when they start out, and then at some point as they evolve and their business grows, it's a reflection of, hey, would you have done this? Like, if you really knew, like you said, what you were getting to, depression, anxiety, long days, long nights, and sometimes feeling very hopeless, because there's days where you're like, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, and I don't even know if it's even worth it, But it's interesting you said that, because I think a lot of entrepreneurs go through that. And then it was really interesting when you said, you were still in your full-time role within like a 6-month span before, long play was really, coming to evolution. And it's actually kind of typical, because usually for most people, most entrepreneurs that start businesses, they start off with, okay, I'm going to do this and do a little bit of it. And next, like, well, your side hustle kind of overpowers everything else that you're doing. So like, might as well dedicate all my time to this. Oh, and by the way, I'm making some money, oh, and then I'm making more money. Okay. And then I need help. And the next thing you know is, you're up to 18 people. I mean, that's amazing.
Thanks.
You're December 2018, you're starting a business, and now you're up to 18 people. I mean, and especially with everything that's been happening over the last couple of years, let's just face it, the global economy has been through a roller coaster multiple times. And it's even going through like one right now, or several, I should say, right? So let's talk a little bit about, so as you kind of got into email marketing, because, I think there's a lot of people that would say, email is dead. And there's a lot of people that would say, oh no, email is like the one platform that I'm always checking. So what's your thoughts on like the current state of email marketing, like, from a B2C and from a B2B standpoint?
For sure. So I can definitely only speak to the B2C standpoint. Not very familiar with the B2B trends or anything like that. I think email has been proclaimed to be dead or dying for like 20 years now. And there's this Ryan Holiday book called Perennial Seller. And in it, he references a specific, I guess, framework. And the idea is just, hey, to predict how long something will probably last in the future, see how long it's already been in existence for. So instead of thinking something like TikTok is probably going to be around in 30 years, it's only been around for 1 or 2 years. So the longevity on that, in terms of placing bets, should be lower than email, which has been around for decades at this point. So that's kind of how I approach it, where, hey, let's put more money and bet on the platforms and the channels and the people who have been succeeding and been around and been able to last all these different years. And email is one of those platforms. Now Facebook and Instagram is becoming one of those platforms. And I'm more interested in the ones that have been around for a while and figuring out how to master them, rather than jumping on the next new trend all the time. And it just gets exhausting trying to master Snapchat, and then Snapchat is dying, mastering Pinterest, and then Pinterest is dying, and then TikTok, and there's always going to be that new platform. So let's look in the past instead of trying to always kind of stay up to date with events.
Interesting. So I think one thing that I heard you say is this is that, the traditional email, right, is still around, but I think we're seeing a shift where, email and that kind of, written communication has really shifted more to, I guess, call it social email, like Facebook and right.
Yeah. And I think email itself, I'm also seeing consumers are shifting towards seeing email as a platform to communicate with brands. Whereas I think in the past, it really was a very personal, like literally it was electronic mail. So it's where you emailed your friends, but like no one emails their friends really anymore. Email is really where people expect to hear from the brands that they follow, to get discounts, to see product releases, to get content, all that kind of stuff. So I do think email as a channel is shifting, but I do have faith that it's going to be around for a while, solely because it's been around for a while and it's going to kind of stick around.
Yeah. No, I think, a couple of things on email. And the reason I asked that question is just that, you brought up TikTok, right? And that's kind of more on the social front where, while I lived through the days of MySpace, and of course I lived through the days of AOL. And when you were talking about in the early days, I remember, I think it was circa high school, like getting so fucking excited about popping my AOL CD and dial-up internet and hearing that annoying fucking dial-up sound. And like, oh, I'm going to email my friends. I'm going to send an email. Like this is the greatest thing ever, right? Now it's just like, and I think that's what you were trying to point out is just that I think the purpose of email has shifted to where, short form communication, which I guess could still be classified as email, has shifted more to social. And then the traditional email, like, Gmail or Outlook, are used more for ways of, like you said, brands to communicate to consumers for like, oh, hey, Macy's just having a sale or something. So, you're getting an email and you get all excited because there's a coupon for 20% off or something, right?
Mhm.
Included in the email. So, and I think a lot of that, I mean, is that kind of what you were saying, is that email has kind of shifted based on, I guess, the changing consumer mindset?
Yeah, I think just overall email has shifted from being a friend and personal channel to really a work and branded e-commerce kind of channel.
hmm So, one of the things that you mentioned, with Long Play, that you focus on, your full service email marketing agency, and you
Mhm.
also work with, a lot of e-commerce brands, right? So, you're doing a lot of B2C, right, for a lot of these bigger brands, correct?
Yeah, so we only do B2C and we mainly work with e-commerce brands kind of in health, wellness, lifestyle, apparel, jewelry, that kind of space.
hmm
And yeah, we take care of all their email marketing. So copywriting, strategy, design, implementation, literally taking that entire channel off their plate.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit in depth more about email, since it's on the B2C side, right? As you're communicating to the consumers across different industries, right? What are some things that you're seeing? I mean, let's face it, what email marketing was 5 years ago is nothing like today, right? I think I remember like guys like Gary Vaynerchuk, talking about, yeah, I used to have like 40% open rates or something like 15 years ago. And like now I'm looking if I get 4%. So like, why is that? I mean, what's your thoughts on like kind of is it because of the attention span that we're bidding against with consumers? Because let's face it, the marketplace is so congested that everybody's bidding for your attention every day, right? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
So I mean, I think the 40 to 4% is probably pretty dramatic. We still expect, kind of the 15 to 20% open rates for very big lists, like a million person kind of lists. And we still
hmm
get 20 to 40% open rates on some of our clients as well. And that's still targeting pretty significant sizes.
Okay.
So I think, especially with consumer attention, it really speaks to the relationship that you have with your customers, how you're acquiring that list, and what kind of communications you're sending them. Um, then it just kind of goes back to fundamental marketing principles. If I'm talking to a brand and they're saying like, hey, I'm getting 4% open rates, my concern is less around, hey, maybe email isn't your channel, maybe it's really competitive, and it shifts more
Right.
to the line of questioning is around, how did you acquire that list? What are you sending to them? Basically, why are people not interested in you? Because email
Right.
is still a proven channel and still generating revenue. We're still seriously opening emails. So if you're really struggling to generate revenue from an email standpoint, I think the question is more around your brand and your relationship with customers versus the channel itself.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, and I'm glad that you share that because, first of all, even though email is still around, you did point out the fact that it might not be the right channel. Let's face it; it just really depends on if you're a really young brand and you're trying to attract a really young audience. Chances are they might not be on email; they might be all over social media. If it's more
Mm-hmm.
like, I guess millennials or maybe even baby boomers, like the older generation, right? Then they might more gravitate towards email because guess what? They still check email in that way. I mean, I'm thinking of like my parents that, use Outlook, I think, or Hotmail
For
or whatever
sure.
it is,
I,
you
I do
know.
think it's worth considering that there's audience that opens emails, so like the baby boomers and seniors, but they're not apt
hmm
to buy things online. So they might not necessarily be your ideal customer because they're interacting with the channel, but not in the way you want them to. And we're actually seeing young people more apt to buy through email. So
Yeah.
we have clients whose audiences are more kind of in the 15 to 25 range, and
hmm
email is a fantastic channel for them. Even though you would expect 15-year-olds are probably not very active through email, they're used to interacting with brands through that particular channel, and that's where they get all of those updates and communication because social media becomes kind of more of their personal channel for them.
hmm Yeah, that's really good. I actually want to ask you another question because I think you can share a lot about this. It's kind of a two-part question. Is this and the first part is, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see companies make when it comes to email marketing? And then the flip side of that is, what are some things that they're not doing that you really should be doing in email marketing?
Yeah, great question. So honestly, those two questions are very much overlapped. The biggest mistake that we see brands doing is not sending email or not using it as a channel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so a lot of people either they're starting their brand and they're focusing on social media and their website and all these different channels, but they're not even growing their email list to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of those things that I would definitely recommend as you're launching your brand. Just make sure you're collecting that email list. Even if you do something with it a little bit further on in the process, at least collect those people, because it's one of the only channels that you really have direct access to your customers. Facebook, social media, things like that, you're still kind of speaking to the masses, whereas email, you can send something specifically to one person. So
Right.
really the biggest mistake is not doing email marketing at all. The other mistake that I see is brands seeing email as a channel for them to communicate with customers for their own company's benefit.
Mm-hmm.
So I see a lot of brands just kind of sending out like monthly newsletters of, hey, here's what we've been doing, here's what's up, here's what's new. And my perspective on that is like consumers don't really care about what's going on with your business. You need to earn the trust and the respect for them to care about what's going on
Yeah.
behind the scenes. So instead of starting off the relationship, telling people about yourself, start off the relationship with your customers through email by giving relationship-driven content, value-driven content. I'm a huge fan of kind of content blog posts and those types of emails. That's really just around delivering topics and information that your customers are really interested in. And then from
Yeah.
there, you can kind of segue into product pushes and things like that. Those are probably the
Absolutely.
biggest two
Mm-hmm.
mistakes. And then the third one is really kind of as you get further on into email marketing, I see a lot of brands not segmenting and not really leveraging the use of customer data. So especially with email, you have the chance to pull in data around what types of products your customer viewed, what kind of customers bought from you, where they came in from their sources. You can hook it up to surveys to get a sense of like their customer profile, like things like birthdays, interests,
Mm-hmm.
topics, things like that, and really pulling all of that information together to really create an email that's tailored made for that particular consumer.
Yeah. No, those were some really, really good points that you mentioned there. The one really a big fan of is you said, hey, build relationships with your customers, earn their trust, which really all goes back to it's like, you can't ask someone to buy something without getting to know them, without earning their trust, right? In building that relationship. And I think, another thing that you mentioned is just that the beauty about email is just that it's so direct and it can be so personal because they're getting it in their inbox, right? And even though you're still, sending thousands of emails or tens of thousands of emails, it just feels more personal because they're getting it in their inbox, right? And it kind of almost speaks to them directly, right? The only other thing that I wanted, to ask you, because I'm really curious about, from an email marketing standpoint, is retention, right? So, like, what are some things to consider about retention? Because let's face it, retention in email marketing is a bitch, just to be able to keep people in your list. So what are some tips that you can share on, like, how do you retain people within the domain of a brand without them leaving?
For sure. And with retention, I really kind of take a step back and just start with, hey, what's your ideal customer journey? So for example, the
Mm-hmm.
brands that we work with, there's usually some combination of these three product types. There's probably subscriptions, there's probably one-off purchases, and there's probably like bundles or boxes and things like that. So the first thing that we do when we sit down with any client is like, hey, what's your ideal customer journey? Do most people buy one product and then you kind of upsell them into a bundle and then you upsell them into subscription? Do people
Mm-hmm.
subscribe right away? And then we kind of go through like, what are the biggest reasons for people to drop off? So again, with email retention, it's the same as just retaining customers overall. So it's really
Sure.
understanding why are people dropping off in the first place and what's that next step that you want them to take? Because without those two answers, we can't really move forward in terms of like what content should we send them. Yeah, so we kind of look at what's the ideal customer journey, what's the natural next step we want them to take, and that's really where you start segmenting your customers. So you start bucketing people into, hey, people who've only bought from you one time and they bought a single purchase. What's our objective for them? Okay, we want them to come back and just buy another single purchase. Okay, great. So all of our messaging is going to be tailor-made around that particular next action item.
Yeah.
Let's say someone was subscribing and then they drop off. What's their next action item? Do we want them to resubscribe or do we want them to buy another single item? And being able to be very clear around what's the ideal next action item with your customers helps a ton with retention because it's really about just guiding them and reducing some of that choice fatigue. and focusing them on what you want them to do next. Versus, I think a lot of brands are just like, hey, we just want you to do a thing, just like don't leave. We don't really know what we want you to do if you
Right,
stay.
right,
Just don't
right,
leave us. And
right.
then the customer's like, I don't really know what you want. You're kind of throwing offers at me from all these different angles, and I'm confused. So I'm just gonna go because I don't really know what you want from me. So again, with
Yeah,
relationship, it's like, hey, we want to deepen our relationship. What do we want next? And the
yeah.
way I always see email and our strategy is really about how do we help you build relationships at scale with your customers? And that starts with what's your relationship with your customer? Email is just the channel that we choose to use because it's so
Mm-hmm.
targeted and we can segment from a tactical side, standpoint, but from a strategic standpoint, anything we do on the email side can be done on any other channel. And it's really about what's your ideal relationship with your customers? What's that next stage that you're trying to progress them to? And how do we best communicate that to them?
Yeah. No, you mentioned a few things there that I'm a big fan of, and the first one is building relationships with people. Basically, an email is a phenomenal channel for doing that. The second thing that you talked about, which I'm also a big fan of, is really just delving in deeper and understanding that customer journey, like what their buying habits are, like you said, one-off purchases or a subscription or whatever it might be, or special offer, or what kind of lured them in, or basically entice them to open up their wallet and spend some money, with that brand. And then, kind of the cherry on the top, so to speak, is being suggestive and saying, okay, well, you might like this as well. It's kind of like, I'm thinking like when I buy shit from Amazon and then I get flooded with emails from Amazon saying, oh, you might like this, or you might like that, or like that. And even though it might seem kind of annoying at first, when I think about it, it's actually quite genius because they're actually, it's an autonomous approach. I understand that. But at the same time, it's so personalized to your buying habits. And I think that's what a lot of consumers actually like, because it gives them a sense of acknowledgement. It gives them a sense of familiarity where a brand has actually devoted the time to understand what they don't like. And I think that's probably what a lot of brands don't do, is they probably don't do that suggestive selling based on like previous buying habits. Even if you just bought, I don't know, just something small, maybe you bought headphones or AirPods or I don't know, whatever it might be, right? But then really going to that extra step and having that suggestive selling. So Jess, I mean, you shared a lot of great things. These were really the couple of questions that I wanted to ask. And I know the audience is going to be very appreciative of, especially with the relationship building, suggestive selling, getting to know the customer journey. And, before we wrap things up, how can people reach you out there? What's the best way to connect with you if they want to learn more about your company or maybe even hire you for some email marketing?
Yeah, for sure. So our website is www.longplaybrands.com.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably the best way just to kind of get a sense of what we do and who we've worked with. And if you want to work with us, reaching out through there. For me personally, Instagram is probably the best channel. And my handle there is just Jess Chan with 2 J's.
Okay.
So feel free to reach out there as well.
Awesome. Jess, I want to thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation and looking forward to sharing this out in the stratosphere.
Thanks for having me. It was great.